evening and thanks for joining us. There are several controversies tonight casting a shadow over the 2010 Olympics, and our first report uncovers another hidden cost of the games that you'll be paying, even as the province sinks deeper into debt and cuts back funding for schools and services. BC Hydro is spending $250,000 for a luxury suite at the Olympic Games. It's discretionary spending that some people believe should have been among the first items on the government's list of cuts. And that became today's hot topic at the BC legislature.
The government expects us to believe, and the people of British Columbia to believe, that they scoured the books for discretionary spending to cut, like high school sports, like parent advisory councils, like programs for public health, and they missed luxury boxes for hockey games.
That, in a nutshell, is what this is all about. BC Hydro is using one of the most expensive luxury suites at GM Place during the Olympics to allow 20 people to attend 33 hockey games. Total cost more than $250,000 at a time when the BC Liberal government is also slashing all kinds of funding for amateur sports, communities, and the arts.
Why is it acceptable to spend hundreds of thousands of taxpayer dollars on luxury boxes at GM Place when British Columbia is losing vital programs for kids and to keep our population healthy?
It's the contrast that is the issue here. Is spending public money on a luxury box a greater priority than funding things like high school sports? In the legislature, the Olympics minister chose to ignore that line of questioning, saying Hydro was trying to reward its customers who were best at saving energy in their homes.
These tickets will be distributed to residential and business customers who have demonstrated leadership in the area of conservation and to promote business development opportunities with BC Hydro.
Outside the House, the minister continued to defend spending money on that luxury suite.
The optics for me are about conservation, and it's about good government incenting good behavior. And I think this program does that.
But the opposition insists this is all about priorities when it comes to spending public money. Those priorities are skewed right now, they say.
The contrast between the government spending the kind of money that they're spending on a luxury box for 20 people to attend events compared to kids who aren't able to get the money to be able to play hockey all year round shows that the government just doesn't get it.
It's a safe bet the NDP will continue to find all kinds of questionable government spending and frame that against the backdrop of spending cuts in areas such as sports and the arts. It's a theme that will likely continue all fall down at the legislature.
And you may have an opinion on this one, too. The province is considering legislation that would allow police officers, paramedics, and others to forcibly move homeless people to a shelter during extreme weather. And if the province introduces the legislation soon, it could become law in time for the 2010 Olympics. Critics say it's an attempt to clean up the streets prior to the games, but the government says there is no Olympic tie-in, and this is simply a much-needed measure to protect the lives of the homeless.
Dave is 40 years old and has been living on Vancouver streets for years. But if the BC government has its way, this winter, Dave and others like him will be rounded up and taken to homeless shelters during extreme weather.
No, they shouldn't be allowed to do that?
No.
Why?
Well, it's your free human rights. Like, you can sleep who you want to sleep with and where you want to sleep.
At least we want to give the power to the police to take an individual like that to the shelter. We're not going to compel them to stay, but to be able to take them to the shelter and say, here's an outreach worker who will now talk to you about the fact that this is a warm place, a meal for you for tonight.
The government says it was motivated by the death of a homeless woman in downtown Vancouver last winter. Police tried 3 times to get her into a shelter, but she refused.
The BC Civil Liberties Association believes the government has a more sinister motive. They think this has everything to do with getting rid of street people during the 2010 games.
And the suggestion is, well, we can't have people sleeping in the streets in the winter, that would be intolerable and inhumane. We don't think it's a coincidence that the Olympics are coming and suddenly there's an interest in getting the homeless off the streets and out of sight.
The association obtained documents which show the government considered jailing those who refuse to go to shelters. While Coleman says that won't happen, some force may be used.
I don't think you can use excessive force, but I think you could say, here, we'll take your stuff, we're going to help you, get in the car, take you to the shelter. I mean, most people actually aren't going to fight this.
If it's 10 below Celsius, then I think it probably would be a good idea, because a lot of them may die.
Because, you hear stories about Olympics when they just put people on buses and ship them out of town so that it doesn't look like we have a homeless problem, but that's not going to make it go away.
Meantime, Vancouver's mayor and others are skeptical the legislation will work.
We have to have more space in shelters to accommodate these people, and we saw this problem last winter where all of the shelters were maxed out in the cold weather. We have to look carefully at the potential impact on our police. The police are not frontline social workers.
For now, Dave can sleep where he wants while the government finalizes the legislation and figures out how to pay for it.
And then there are accusations highlighted in one of the most respected newspapers in the world that we are unfairly protecting our home field advantage at the coming Olympics. According to the New York Times, foreign athletes who expected to spend quite a bit of time practicing at the Vancouver area Olympic venues haven't been granted the access they hoped for. Canadian officials insist we've provided more access than any previous host, largely because our sites were completed early. But they also acknowledge that we have pledged to own the podium.
The Olympic venues for the 2010 Games are in place, constructed well ahead of schedule to give our Canadian athletes the edge and the chance to have Canada ranked #1 in medal standings.
What we'd said out many years ago, the Canadian Olympic Committee and their various partners, they said, look, we're having the games here in 2010. We've hosted 2 Olympic Games, a summer and a winter, and haven't won a gold medal. We're the only country to do that. Let's turn it on its head. Rather than saying let's win a gold medal or 2, let's try to be the very best nation in the world, win the most medals.
But some athletes and coaches from the U.S. and other foreign countries are crying foul. According to a recent article in the New York Times, some American athletes are accusing Canada of being un-Olympic by granting non-Canadian athletes minimal access to Olympic venues. Regarding the track for luge, the article states, Canadian athletes will have had hundreds of trips down what is widely considered the world's most treacherous course. Foreign athletes will have had a few dozen.
We as Canadians, being very Canadian, have given more than the usual access to other nations. And in fact, we have to follow very stringent International Federation rules. Nobody from the IS has complained at all. And as I say, they've gotten more than they suspect, so it's pretty whiny to me.
Vancouver has abided by those rules set by the International Federation for each sport and says it's normal for the host country to have an advantage.
It's important that we give our athletes the best chance to be successful because they're responsible for generating the atmosphere. And I think that's what the public wants, and there's nothing unsportsmanlike about helping to prepare your own team and give them a good chance to be successful.
While access to a venue is an asset, it's not necessarily the only factor needed to produce an Olympic champion. Kathy Kreiner-Phillips is proof of that. She won the Olympic gold in giant slalom at the 1976 Olympics in Innsbruck. Before that race, she never had a chance to train on the course.
It seems like Canadians were so concerned about being fair, and it's in a way we're shooting ourselves in the foot. I mean, now we finally have an opportunity to have a bit of a home court advantage.
And what about the pledge early on that these would be the greenest games ever? Vancouver has said that after sport and culture, the environment is the third pillar of the Olympics. But the optics might be a little off on this aspect too, with General Motors spending a lot of money to provide a lot of vehicles for use during the games, which don't exactly qualify as fuel sippers.
Many of the venues at these 2010 games were built with cutting-edge technology designed to minimize the impact these projects would have on the environment.
We just received an award from the Globe Foundation and the Canadian Green Building Council for designing and building very green venues.
Both Olympic villages in Whistler and in Vancouver have also won international recognition for Vancouver's efforts to improve the environment. For example, all the toxic soil on the south side of False Creek was cleaned before the village went up. But the next phase of the, quote, greenest games ever isn't as easy a sell. Thousands of General Motors vehicles are arriving daily in Richmond and being stored at an enormous parking lot. Enormous because in total, there'll be more than 4,600 of these vehicles at the peak of the games. And yes, more than 700 will be hybrids, 950 will have cylinder deactivation, and others will include the use of flex and biodiesel fuels, have direct fuel injection and variable timing, all aimed at saving gas.